Hello, my name is Kuda Dube Rukanda. Of course, the full name is Kudapash. I'm currently an adjunct research professor at the National Language Institute at the Midland State University in Zimbabwe. I am also a founding research fellow of the HICA Group in London. The HICA Group is a research group that focuses on computable knowledge modeling and reasoning with specific applications to healthcare. We are also interested in constructing health technologies that can be used by clinicians with a particular focus on those aspects of technologies, especially AI oriented technologies that are not yet fully utilized in the domain in the healthcare domain. So those are some of the work that I'm doing. Um, in the past three videos, I have been trying to draw your attention to research literature reviews that are done by experienced researchers around the world and try to learn how they write literature reviews through the published papers. This video is a summary or a more organized presentation, more like a lecture on literature review and knowledge gap establishment. Notice that, of course, this is part of a series of videos that I'm giving under research methods, mostly to the community, the computing research community in Zimbabwe. I refer to this series, of course, the craft of research, where we look at some of the research methods that are important in the computing sciences. So today I would like to sort of summarize, to give a more formal discussion of literature reviews and how you use it to establish the gap for your research project. So I will sort of go through a context, define the contexts of a literature review and define what a literature review is. I will try to discuss the purpose as well as the process of doing a literature review and how you can carry it out, how you manage information that you get through the literature review, and also how you critically evaluate the data that you collect from the literature. And then lastly, how you write the literature review. And of course, I always give you some practical exercises and assignments, but in this case, because the community really, I don't particularly expect you to do that. But of course, many of you might want to write when you write your literature review, you may give it to a senior researcher. For those whom I supervise directly, obviously I will read your literature review, and therefore you may want to follow some of the guidelines that are presented here. So one thing I would like to draw attention to is the fact that literature review, there are lots of videos on YouTube on how to write a literature review. What I believe lacks is more teaching relating to how to actually do it, especially from the point where you move from your problem to your literature search terms to actually then conducting a literature review, going through the literature, collecting the data. That is usually an area that is not seriously taught, even on YouTube videos. We can't do that in a single video. It could have to be a series of videos, especially the ones that actually that take literature reviews done by others, and look at how they do it. Look at the methodology of which they used, and also critiquing those with those those aspects in terms of how they conduct a literature review, especially with respect to how we want to view a literature review, and so on. I have already expressed a lot of that when I was discussing specific examples of published literature review papers. Right, let's start by looking at the context of the literature review. Literature review is part of the craft of research, part of the research process that you follow. And the research process that you follow usually starts from defining a research problem. And after that, when you have your problem, you need to review the literature. One of the reasons why you need to do this is to establish that indeed that's a research problem, and also to confirm that others have identified that problem, and also to look at others who have tried to look at that problem, and uh, and to establish how far they have gone. This allows you then to clearly define your scope and so on. So the review of literature is usually divided into two. You review the concepts and the theories, and also you review the previous research findings that relate to that particular problem. So that is very important. After that, in the research process, you go on to formulate your hypothesis, and then you design the research, including, for instance, sample design and so on. And after that, when you have done that, you then perform your collect data, you execute your research plan. This probably involve experiments. During those experiments, you collect data, or you collect data using other means. There are more means than just running experiments. But scientists, if you have a scientific background, you carry out laboratory experiment and collect results. If you are a social scientist, you go into society and find means of collecting data and so on. After that, so it doesn't really matter how you collect your data. You could develop it in computing, especially computer science, we develop an algorithm and run it with test data and then collect data from that. So after that, you do data analysis, you test your hypothesis, if any, and sometimes you need to go back to data collection and so on. And sometimes you even need to go back to your research design and redo the process. And after that, then you interpret your results and write your report and possibly publish some of that. So this diagram is very important in terms of your research. Notice that overall, from you can also go back, right, feedback to your original problem. You can also feed forward from the problem to the interpreted results. So once you get your final interpretation, you go back to your problem and say how far have you achieved the problem, and also you feed forward back to make sure that your original objectives and hypothesis is already set. So that's the context of the literature review. It happens as part of a larger research process. Right. Now, what is a literature review? I would prefer this definition by Fink, 2005. He defines it as a systematic, explicit, and reproducible method. And this is very important. The words that I have put in bold are very important. Um, the main objective of that is to identify, evaluate, and synthesize the existing body of the completed and recorded work produced by other researchers, scholars, and of course practitioners. The important point here is systematic, explicit, and reproducible method for identifying, evaluating, and synthesizing knowledge that is already there. That's what we call literature review. But this happens within the context of your research problem, within the context of the domain that you define, or within the context of a framework that you present, you define yourself. Right. In Many of you might be first, especially those who are doing PhD. You might think, oh, I've come across a paper that seems to be addressing the problem that I am seeking to address. I always advise students to don't panic, because if you read closely, that paper does not necessarily address the problem as you have in your mind. The issue is read it and critique it thoroughly. These are the papers where you should read thoroughly and critique them. And you most of the time you will discover that they have not really addressed your problem. Right. What is the purpose of the literature review? First of all, it is important to know that you want to identify gaps in the literature. Gaps is the basis of your research project, isn't it? You also want to find other people working in your area, and so that you have a community. You also want to identify major seminar works, some of the key works that are important that form the foundation of your project. And also another aspect is to try to know the methodologies that are used by most people in the various research techniques that they apply. Another purpose is to identify the main ideas, conclusions, and theories, and establish similarities and differences between them. So this is very, very, very important to establish. Right. Another uh, reason is to provide a context for your own research. You need to set the context so that you understand it better. The other reason is to show the relationship between previous studies or theories. Uh, and of course, this is very valuable to any project. And lastly, to find out what information already exists in your field of research. So all these are very important uh, purposes for your research. Now, right, it is important to know that academic integrity is important. When you do your research, you need to be able to cite ideas that are not yours. And normally, to do this effectively, you must have done a lot of literature. The diagram you see here is the guideline for managing a suspected breach of academic integrity at Massey University, which is a university I once worked with. They look at various levels, levels 1, 2, 3. And the first level, of course, is where you have a frequent errors in referencing, insufficient and unclear referencing, poor or inappropriate paraphrasing, and so on. So you can be usually this happens to first year students or in the first semester of your study. Students like that don't know much yet. So it's important just to call them and discuss with them. And of course, there are a number of penalties. You could have penalties that include repeating your assignment and do it properly, or you can require a student to attend an appropriate course that teach them how to cite, and also you can reduce the marks as well. They can lose marks. And those are some of the things. At level 2, you are beyond the first semester after you have studied the university, at least one semester of your studies. You have copied segment of another student's work. You have lied about work or contribution or fabricated references or citations. You recycled parts of previous assignments. Those are fairly serious ones. So in that level 2, the course coordinator advises a body within the institute to discuss the issue with the student. And of course, there are channels that are used to do that. And most of these will involve some bodies. It's at least beyond level 1. You need then to involve another unit within the university. But a doctoral student is much more serious because these people are supposed to be knowledgeable. If you are doctoral students, or if you are an experienced student nearing completion of an undergraduate degree, or a research student in final thesis, submitted thesis, this one is level 3 now. It's also possible to copy all the works, so wanting someone to do your work and you don't really do it properly, and within a certain context of your research you don't claim that you claim that it's yours when in fact it's not yours. There are a number of penalties that are associated with that, so it's important. Most universities have got schemes like these, but they may not be expressed in a graph like this. This one is only to guide, for instance, the lecturers so that they can take measures for plagiarism and inadequately citing the references. Right. When you use literature to justify your research, which is one of the most important aspects, you may want to consider the allegory of a penthouse. A penthouse has got foundations, it has ground floor, and then it is first floor, second floor, and the very top, which is the penthouse, right? You can liken this structure to a literature review. The foundation is the literature survey, and Of course, the groundwork now is the work, experimentation, investigation. So it is grounded. The whole of your research project is based on the foundation, which is the equivalent to the literature review. After that, you do some analysis, evaluation, interpretation, you write your dissertation towards the top. But the whole foundation of a research project is based on the literature review or literature survey, right? The research context really is revolved around contribution to knowledge. And I'm sure all of you are aware that when you are doing your PhD, you need to do a research problem that does some contribution to knowledge. Notice in this diagram that the current boundary of the domain is the outer old layer there. And usually in your case, you have your knowledge and understanding would be a subset of that, because usually it's difficult to have someone who knows everything in a particular domain. So what you know, you of course extend that within your domain by learning more and also developing yourself and the work that you are doing. But when you start contributing, you are adding on your contributions are at the outside the boundary of your domain. And of course, this is important. What you learn remains within the domain. You learn it based on the knowledge that already exists. So that is so projects do fall within the context, within this wider context as well, right? When you are doing an undergraduate degree, you are dealing with a domain that is inside. The entire total degree is inside the boundary of a well-known area, right? Uh, but when you are doing some of your research projects, especially at masters, at MPhil, and so on, you may do research. When you do research, you look at the boundary of your domain, of the entire domain. New research discoveries are extend that boundary. These are discoveries and inventions. But there is a possibility that you do research that also starts contracting the domain, because we now know more. We know what is inside the domain, what is outside, and it's possible to redraw the domain and saying, this is outside the domain. And that's a contribution to knowledge as well. Also, your research degree might actually be contributing to world knowledge. It could start by playing around with some of the things in the domain and then extending that. So this is the project, the wider context of projects. It's possible to have a project that is completely outside the domain. It's yet undiscovered body of knowledge that might lie outside. But of course, the task might be to bring it into the main domain aspect. So these are the various contexts of your project. If it's a third degree, your project is not going to be much outside your domain. It's not that possible. Right. Now the literature review process is sort of winding between within the quadrants. So the literature review space is first you define the search. There is a quadrant for defining the search and performing the literature search and evaluating the material and writing the literature review. So you always it's not a straight path. You can't say you do define search and so on. You start from somewhere and you cycle throughout these domains, these particular areas. It's not a straightforward path. So you are free to go back to redefine the search and the search again, the literature and increase and so on. So it's not a really straight path. Right. Now let's look closely at what you mean by literature search. You start first analyze your domain of your research project. That this is important because you get to understand, you analyze the problem very well, thoroughly, and break it down into components and so on. For instance, you might say, okay, if you have a project in software engineering, for instance, you might want this is, of course, software engineering is based on process models. Normally, these process models. Of course, there are data models as well. But if you are focusing on process models, you can draw your diagram where you look at support elements which assist activities, and activities, of course, involve process models. And of course, you can also define methods and techniques and protocols for the various stages and so on and so on. So that's the entire context of software engineering methodology. And that's a fairly a research territory more for the domain of software engineering. So you need to map your domain and understand your problem better before you do a literature search definition. Way to analyze your problem so as to come up with a search definition for your literature review is to create a spider diagram. A spider diagram is essentially a mind map, like the one you see on this screen, which shows, which tries to analyze the domain of software engineering, break it into various parts. Software engineering consists of phases. It also has methods, development methods, the techniques, and also support elements. And of course, notice that you can also link some of the elements to each other. Like under activities, you can have each activities linked to standards, linked to tools, or you can have techniques that are linked to models. And as you can see, prototyping linked to prototyping under models. And prototyping has got various types of prototypes: evolutionary, throwaway, incremental, and experimental. So it's really a mind map, but with the possibility of linking the leaves of such a mind map. That helps you to analyze your problem. So, in other words, every research problem can be broken down into areas like that. These will then help you define your search, literature search. You can also draw a relevance tree. A relevant tree is not very different from the other model that we have discussed: a research territory map and a relevance, a spider diagram. That is not that different, only that this is a tree with no possibility of the ends linking with each other. Of course, there's always a link. So this is really a tree where a particular domain, for instance, in this case is AI, which can be broken down into these other. This is just an example. Uh, but in your case, you would have your problem, and then it can be broken into components, and then you go on doing that. Of course, to do this, you need to do a mini literature review to come up with all these areas in your problem. So now you have three ways in which you can analyze your problem and document it in form of research territory map, a spider diagram, and a relevance tree. Most of them, of course, are not very different from um, actually, what do we mean by literature search? It's a systematic gathering of published information relating to a particular subject. So normally you have a topic, you get your keywords. After that, you have your search query. When you perform your search, you review the results, and sometimes you may need to go back to your keywords and maybe add more, subtract, or whatever. You come up to a new search query and run your results. And finally, you evaluate. Sometimes when you evaluate, you discover that you need more literature and you go back and so on. But what is important here is you must do it systematically. When you say systematically, it means it must be repeatable. Someone must be able to repeat it. There's a definite process involved, and also you should collect the literature. These days we use reference software with a database, of course, to store your references. So that is important. So normally, for instance, in my case, I always recommend JabRef. It's open source, it's free, it's freely available. Uh, so that's what I would recommend. It runs on most Linux systems. Then, of course, there is EndNote. Normally, EndNote runs on Windows and you have to buy it, otherwise, you won't be able to use it. So, I wouldn't recommend it for Zimbabwe, where our institutions have no money to buy EndNote for you guys. So, it's important to use JabRef. I've put links on this. You can also search JabRef. It has got a reference, and you can even put notes when you are reading the reference. You can also link it to your PDF files. The same, all the software have got some of these facilities, because they sort of copy each other in terms of functionality. So most of the functionality that you need, the basic ones, are there in the open source version, including searching for PDFs and all that stuff. So use tools to manage and document your literature search. Once you search, you have a collection, and it will then be easy to proceed from there. Now, how do you do critical evaluation? How do you critically evaluate the literature? This is a very important and usually very difficult problem for most people. Don't think critique is negative. It's not negative. It aims to find. It doesn't aim to find faults in the literature. You are interested in what you think of your research topic, in order to come up with a good critique, so that you can assess the literature against your work. You look at boundaries, limitations, contradictions, developing aspects, as well as dead ends, things that work and things that don't work. And also you have to show your own thinking. Say something that only you can say, something relating to your problem, right? So critical reading. You can also take a look at some literature relating to critical reading. Normally what you do is you offer your own opinion, give your personal response, and usually your senior researchers can tell that this is your personal response by the way you write it, and also relate the works to each other, sort of. You need to look at your sentences should synthesize the idea of considering the body of literature, comparing them. You also don't just take material the way it is. And also, I always tell you that don't simply tell us that you summarize what those works are. We don't need that, because we can read these papers anyway. So don't repeat them. Consider research literature as something like a contested terrain. The literature itself is not something you can just take as it is. It's an area where you go there and also say your opinion. And that is very important. It's a good sign of a good research. Someone who says his own opinion. Everything you write should be coming from your own opinion. It's from Hart 1998. You will see literature search and review on a topic, some of the aspects that are important. Right, critical evaluation. You could break down your evaluation to the following areas: conceptualization, theoretical framework and hypothesis, research design, results and discussion, and sort of consider these aspects of the work that we are thinking. And so those aspects are very important. When you write, your aim is to provide a coherent arguments that relate to the description of a proposed study. In your case, first know what you are looking for and say something relating to that with respect to the literature. Right. You want to reference past and current literature in the field of the project, discard current omissions and any biases, and also look at how the literature have gone to address your problem. Of course, the whole idea behind the literature review is not that it's something that you do where how you judge the research with respect to your research problem. And we always do this, of course, in everyday life when we comment about other people, when we comment about issues around them. And normally we don't cite people, we don't repeat what other people have said. You say what you think, right? So view the field as a series of interrelated subtopics in form of your own understanding of that field and how it is made up. So your own understanding matters more. So we should have more of that more of your views than a description of what the literature says. Because the literature, you can read it. So don't write anything to do with that literature. Comment, your opinion with respect to your research problem is what matters. So in summary, a literature survey helps to place research project in a wider context to justify your project, of course, and establish the gap in knowledge. And there are two main components, of course. You do your search, and during the search, you collect and you manage your literature using databases, reference software. And then the review itself, you are looking at critical evaluation and writing the results, your findings. Those are the major steps. In other words, you do repeated, and also you can repeat. When you are writing, you can also go back to literature search and add it to your collection and come back to writing. So it's something that is done, sometimes in parallel. And of course, literature reviews are done throughout your project. You don't stop. It's not something that you say, I've done and I've finished. Because sometimes when you are working on a project, you end up finding that some people have published works that you are interested in or that you have not yet, we had not seen but is relevant to your work. So your project should remain up to date, and to achieve that, you need to continuously do the literature review and write the literature review. And in most cases, every phase of your project must have a literature review. And that one is, if you plan your project in such a way that you do the major literature review for your research problem, but then every other step of your project has got its own literature review. And then you do the review, constantly update these literature reviews to make sure that you are covering all aspects. And that is very important, right? I've come to the end of this talk, and I hope it helps. I will continue to talk about the literature review next. I will continue giving examples, studying some of the. I think I will have one or two more sessions where I look again at example literature, see how they have done it, how they have done some of the things I have covered, summarized here. And I also go into some of the literature reviews that I have myself done and published, some of the papers that I have done myself, and how we did it, and my experience of having done it, using the way I have done it. And then, of course, in that case, I'll be able to show you right from the beginning how we started it, how we gathered data, how we did critical review and all that stuff, until we have that paper published as a literature review. Right. With that, I end this recording.